Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the Hot Topics Committee for our summer discussion. My name is Sandy Avila, and I'm one of the current co-chairs of the committee. On behalf of our summer planning team for this event, we welcome you today to a wonderful discussion we are going to have regarding generative AI. The topic title is 1,000 Threats, 1,000 Opportunities, a look at generative AI. A few things to expect from today's session, just to go over, logistics. Please keep yourselves muted as we go through the panelist portion of the presentations. Each presenter who will be introduced here shortly will have 7 minutes to give us a bit of a background, and then we'll have an open Q&A with some questions that we already had generated from panelists as well as from attendees online. And then we'll open it up to everyone who's here for any questions we have for the group. If you'd like to put any comments, please put those in the chat feature in Zoom. If you do have particular questions as we go along through the presentations for our panelists, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Those are two separate things that should be on the Zoom menu towards the bottom of your screen. As always, we'll be monitoring both the QA and the chat. Please use your professional decorum and be respectful of your colleagues. We will turn off the recording before we get into the question and answer portion, so that way that we can feel more comfortable having an open discussion. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. First off is Mark Chalmers. He is the Science and Engineering Librarian at the University of Cincinnati, where he serves as the liaison librarian for physics, mathematics, and multiple engineering departments. Mark coordinates the University of Cincinnati's coding workshop program and is exploring the use of generative AI in coding instruction and other STEM library work. Next off will be TJ Farrell. He serves as the Assistant Head of Creative Spaces at the University of Utah's J. Willard Marriott Library. He oversees operations related to 3D printing, virtual reality, and other emerging makerspace activities. With a background in computer science and philosophy, TJ has a longstanding interest in artificial intelligence. His participation in the 2022 IDEA IMLS Institute on AI allowed him to explore the intricacies of AI adoption in libraries, including potential opportunities, challenges, and risks. Mohammed Hosseini is a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Preventative Medicine, Health and Biomedical Informatics at Northwestern University, where he collaborates with the Northwestern University Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute and the Institute for Augmented Intelligence in Medicine. He is currently based out of Gatler Health Sciences Library and Learning Center in Chicago, and Mohammed is committed to the promotion of ethical approaches in various research areas to ensure that research is conducted responsibly without harming society's trust. Without further ado, I'll let Mark start us off.
Great. Thank you, Sandy, and the committee for having me. And thank you to everyone who's here for kind of making the time to be here. I think, this is just awesome. So I'm just going to kick us off talking a little bit about generative AI and what I'm doing with it. So generative AI it's a broad category. That's one thing I want to talk about up front. It's more than just, ChatGPT. It's image models such as, DALL-E or Stable Diffusion or Midjourney. There are models now making music and videos. Actually, Meta, Facebook, they just released a really interesting music model open source the other day. But I want to focus my discussion here on the large language models or ChatGPT or GPT-4 kind of specifically because I think they have the broadest interest among those of us in education, kind of generally speaking. But, generative, this is the new word. And that's because these things, they generate, they create. This is kind of contrasted with maybe classical AIs, which are kind of hyper specific and maybe narrowly focused on a certain task, such as classification, like email spam detection, or predictors, things that might predict what post to show you next as you scroll on a news feed. Or certain logic engines that are maybe trained to play certain games like chess or Go, kind of famously. The really key difference here, right, is that the generative AIs have a really broad use cases as they can take on an extremely wide range of inputs. chess models just take in chess moves as inputs, whereas the kind of input space of a model like ChatGPT is huge, as well as the output space. It's probably functionally infinite in terms of the amount of combinations of words or tokens you could put into this thing and what it might spit out. So they generate new things, new images, new sentences, new books, or all sorts of things depending on the model and the use case. So I want to focus just on ChatGPT, as I think that's really why we're all here. And that is a generative large language model. It's a chatbot developed by a company called OpenAI, and it was trained very specifically to dialogue in quote unquote natural way and produce human-like text. So I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts here. Maybe later we can, but things like next token prediction or transformers or reinforcement learning with human feedback, I'm not going to go into that here. But I do want to emphasize one technical thing, and that is just the scale of this model. This thing is trained on so much text data from books, newspapers, websites, think the entire internet. So the scaling in two dimensions, the size of the training data and the amount of computing resources that have gone into training and subsequently kind of running these models. So for GPT-4, the estimate, we don't know for sure, but the estimate is that the neural network inside this model has 1 trillion parameters, right? That number is way too big for us to comprehend, but that scaling has really what's created the conditions for things like, the intelligence or the reasoning capabilities that we've all kind of maybe seen or interacted with firsthand. Obviously, that's a very complex and nuanced kind of discussion. However, I think one thing the world can really agree on is that kind of qualitatively and quantitatively, there was a big breakthrough with these models and something's different. And there is a kind of step up in capability and capacity. So I just want to emphasize one technical point here, especially because I'm talking to library people, and that is that ChatGPT is not a database. It is a neural network with billions, and with GPT-4, possibly 1 trillion parameters. And that knowledge that's kind of latent in the training data has all been compressed into the weights of these neurons within this neural network, rather than some kind of traditional information retrieval system. Even though it has information retrieval capabilities, it's just operating fundamentally different from a mechanistic perspective. So I just want to emphasize that. And I want to move on and talk more about what I'm doing with it here. So there's all sorts of fun, interesting, novel, quirky things, that ChatGPT or these models can do. But one reason why it's incredibly important in my world is that this thing can code, and it can code really well, and it can also educate. So my kind of North Star through this hurricane of possibilities and potential that has been thrust on us in the last 4 months really has been a focus on how it can be used for learning. I imagine what would it be like if everyone in the world had a personal AI tutor that could help teach them in ways that kind of meet their own individualized learning needs. I think there's just so much potential there. So as Sandy mentioned in my bio, I oversee, manage, curate our technical workshops at UC through the engineering library. And I've done a ton of work over the last 5 years on our Python workshop series, expanding them, integrating new technologies, and revising the curriculum. I've done this in partnership with computer science. And I'm really proud of the work that I've done to attempt to minimize a lot of the pain and friction that's associated with learning a new coding language. And so I had a call to action moment because I'm always on the lookout for how I can improve my workshops. And that was during the GPT-4 developer live stream back near the end of March. So just kind of in brief, what happened during this was Greg Brockman, who's a co-founder of OpenAI, people behind ChatGPT, he had this new model, GPT-4, spin up the code for a Discord bot right on the spot. And this was really resonant with me because one of the workshops we started teaching in the last year was how to build a Discord bot with Python. And that was brilliant because GPT-4, ChatGPT, you probably know they all have this knowledge cutoff date of September 2021. And since that point in time, Discord had made massive changes to its API. So writing a bot that would work with Discord's would require updated documentation. So this was a problem I encountered in my job, and I had to work with students to completely revise and update our workshop. And this took weeks. But in this demo, one thing Greg Brockman did was he copy pasted the entire updated documentation for Discord's API. So it was like 15,000 words. He put it in GPT-4 with the error message. And what it did was it went in, it found the one paragraph it needed from the entire documentation, it updated the code and got the bot online and working. So that moment I was totally stunned, and I knew I needed to wrestle with this thing and figure out its place in our workshops, as I knew it was going to change how people code. So I'll just say about that demo that building a Discord bot was by far, like, very far away from the most impressive thing that they did. So I encourage you all to look at that and watch that if you've not already. So the kind of upshot here is I started getting completely obsessed with GPT-4 and figuring out all these people had been using it behind the scenes during like red teaming and different testing. So what I did was I looked at all these different resources and I put together a new workshop called kind of a practical guide to learning to code with ChatGPT, which teaches people how to integrate ChatGPT into their own personal journey learning to code. We've also revised our Python workshops to integrate tips and structure for using ChatGPT as kind of a personal tutor as I work through that content. And I'm happy to talk at length about those, but I know I'm well over my time. I will just say one thing that I highly recommend if you're interested in the education and learning applications of these models is this paper that I linked in here called How to Learn and Teach Economics with Large Language Models. Economics is a placeholder for just about anything. It all translates. So I am going to stop there, but I look forward to the discussion and the questions.
Great. Thank you all so much for being here. Again, as Sandy mentioned, I'm TJ, and I work at the University of Utah in what you would consider to be a makerspace. But really my job day to day is discovering ways to democratize access to difficult to use, expensive, or otherwise inaccessible technology. So yeah, I like to think of my work as kind of enabling a radical democratization of access to tech. And so artificial intelligence has always kind of played in the back of my mind as something that I like to think about and learn about and talk to others about. I certainly use it a fair bit in my day-to-day job, more so with the advent of ChatGPT. So, really I like to think about a lot of these tools as they get easier to use, people become more productive. So, whether I'm teaching workshops, I'm a lot more adaptable. Most recently I was participating in a podcasting workshop and just kind of like solidifying some of my own processes and like helping ensure kind of active engagement and learning on the part of participants. Like having a language model to bounce ideas off of is huge for a number of reasons. So yeah, I guess thinking about ChatGPT specifically, we've seen a huge growth in that. I think a lot of people are paying pretty close attention to that. So I don't want to stay on it for too long. But one metric that I keep coming back to is just the number of plugins that are available for ChatGPT. So ChatGPT has a kind of a knowledge cutoff date that it claims is around 2021. But with the advent of plugins, it can now search for things. So if I'm looking for news articles that mention artificial intelligence or news articles that mention anything, I can have it kind of reach out and look at things. It's been fascinating to see all of the new benchmarks that are required for large language models. The traditional kind of testing metrics that we use for AI models of various sorts have had to be changed and rather rapidly with this new advent. And I've also found it fascinating to listen to perspectives from kind of thought leaders in the field where they're urging caution. So there's a link here to a talk by Jeffrey Hinton, who recently left Google Brain or DeepMind. I apologize, I don't know exactly which organization he was in. But there's a lot of talk about, are we kind of butting up against artificial general intelligence? And of course, I think that it's quite important, especially as library employees, we want to be very balanced in our kind of hyping of technology. So, but again, there's probably a reason why this is getting so much attention, and people with much more experience are urging this level of caution. So, the things that I'm paying attention to are, how are people using this? I mean, specifically ChatGPT, how is it being used as a tool? So I linked to a couple of papers that came out recently just on, it's interesting, we're seeing academic papers, perhaps not peer reviewed, but at least large teams of people working on new and novel ways just of implementing a tool. How can we get a machine that tends to hallucinate to be a little more self-reflective? How can we get it to kind of explore the viability? If it proposes something or suggests something, you can also ask it to reason through the viability of that. And I think that there's a lot of space for that to continue to grow. And yeah, just thinking through kind of some of the opportunities and some of the downsides. I guess, to speak to that, I feel as though the stratification of knowledge becomes all the more relevant to us. I think that also leads to a more important role for libraries. I think that, I like to think of my organization as kind of a ladder for knowledge with rungs that are accessible to everybody. And so, having a space where people can come and explore these topics and these ideas, kind of get hands-on access to tools, I think that stays kind of a central focal point for me and my organization. And yeah, I think I'll stop there. Just as, thinking of new models as tools, there's a lot of opportunity there. So thank you all.
Well, thank you very much. This was awesome, TJ and Mark. So I'm here to talk a little bit about what's next, or what could the future look like. And in doing that, I'd like to start with a sort of short preface about where we are and why do you actually need generative AI. I think for a while, access to information was not keeping pace with the increased production of knowledge. But then, the internet and open science movement significantly changed the whole landscape. That said, access to information per se doesn't extend the day for me to read more, nor does it give me more bandwidth to analyze more information. And in fact, while it is true that access has increased and, search engines find information in a split second, because information is so fragmented, sifting through information to find the right bit and then comprehending, analyzing, and using information is still very complicated. From my perspective as a researcher, based in an affluent university that has access to almost everything, I'm still having a difficult time to understand or use available information that I have access to. And it's just very difficult to keep up with everything. And I think this is one of those problems that, within the library world, the suggested remedies have been mostly technical. It's like, oh yeah, let's come up with this new shiny tool that scrapes the web better. Let's integrate data, let's standardize, let's implement knowledge management systems and so on. But these solutions don't help me comprehend, analyze, and consolidate information that I need for my research. And at the end of the day, all of these tasks are still assigned to people like me, like people who do research. It's grand that we have so much access, but someone has to do the work. The idea is that, yeah, let's build infrastructure to increase access. And this would definitely result in better use of available information. I think I fully agree. I'm fully on board with that. I think access is a necessary component of being effective and efficient user of information, but it is not sufficient. And, as a researcher, I feel like it seems like I am the bottleneck. I am the bottleneck because I have access to all these kind of sources of information, but I cannot use them effectively and efficiently. And this bottleneck, this very problem, could be addressed with generative AI and large language models. And, I think they are already helping us, but they will help us a lot more in the future. And I think in this context, librarians are perfectly positioned to use these systems. You might be asking how. Well, I'm not a librarian. My background is in ethics, but the past 2 years I've been sitting in a library, in Galter Library in Chicago, and I have realized that you guys are amazing in curating, annotating, and connecting relevant bits and pieces of information based on context. And so you can play a pivotal role when user groups like universities or colleges want to implement these models into their existing systems. I think your expertise is needed to fine-tune generative AI, and this will be an ongoing task. Let me use an example to show exactly what I mean with fine-tuning. I'd like to share my screen. Yeah, is this working? Yeah, okay. So this is Medimate. This is a product. This is basically a website that is developed by one of my colleagues here at Northwestern, Dr. Leibovitz. The system has used ChatGPT as a baseline, but then it is fine-tuned based on a specific and small library. At the moment, it has 8 functionality based on what the developer wanted it to look like and to work. The first one is you can ask it to provide a long answer based on one of these preset tones, like a senior researcher explaining to a junior researcher. For the sake of saving time, I've already entered these. So for instance, I asked, aspirin risks. The system offers, like this is different from what ChatGPT would offer because the library that is used to train this model is different from what ChatGPT has used. And this is exactly what I mean with fine-tuning. Another functionality is, you can ask it to generate questions for board examination based on each of these areas of studies. You can ask it to provide clinical pearls, like, tell me about asthma. You can even upload your own PDF and ask the system to generate questions for you. You can ask, generate 10 questions about this file, or you can upload a course description or anything, any PDF you can upload and say, generate questions for me. You can generate patient education material. So for instance, here based on the health literacy of the patient. Here we can say, dietary guidance for gout. This is some dietary guidance for gout for a patient that has basic health literacy level. You can ask it to generate support for PubMed searches, like you can, use the PICO model. You can ask it to offer alternative diagnosis, like if the physician is suspecting that the patient has bronchitis, they can say, hey, what else could this be? And the system say, oh, maybe this is pneumonia, maybe this is asthma, maybe this is COPD. Another option is, to think about side effects. I have this patient who's, well, say 65, male, is on Spiriva. This is a medication for COPD. And they also have this dry cough. Tell me about the side effects. The system generates. So, the point is that this is a system that is fine-tuned based on using a small library that is offered by the developer. I think another major area that could be that could thrive very quickly is studies that explore archives. So basically, if you own any textual data or visual data or a combination of both, it's now prime time to explore them. And in particular, we can fine-tune an externally pre-trained language model to work with our own data. I'm going to use an example here. So I am involved as an ethicist in a study that explores the archives of Human Genome Project, together with my mentor, Christy Holmes, and some excellent researchers here at Northwestern, based at Amaral Lab, and also the National Human Genome Research Institute. We are analyzing the archives of the Human Genome Project to understand how the project developed and how scientific goals were formulated and evolved. For context, the archive contains more than 2 million documents, different object types, notes, memos, emails, presentations, etc. And our colleagues here at Northwestern, who use large language models, developed this machine learning application that extracts content and masks sensitive information. So to use an analogy, these amazing researchers have basically developed something like a sniffer dog that goes through the archive, finds documents that have sensitive information, masks the sensitive information, annotates it so that I can later on find out that this document was redacted, and then does this on repeat. This is amazing. This is an amazing tool. So again, if you have an archive, it is prime time. Another example is this new study that was published last week today. These people we're basically working on state-of-the-art models to develop predictions. This is done in NYU. The aim of the project was to improve accuracy regarding clinical predictions about readmission, mortality, comorbidity, length of stay, insurance denial. So imagine a patient comes in, we want to make sure that we know how long this patient will stay. And that could have an impact on, reimbursement, the care we provide, so many things. So there is both clinical and commercial application for accurate prediction. Now, using large language models, they went through this archive of 7.2 million clinical notes, which included radiography reads, history, physicals, from 387,000 patients across 4 hospitals. The data was from 2011 to 2020. And then they trained this medical language model to, again, like a sniffer dog, to go through those documents and make the prediction a lot more accurate. Now, this is not like this kind of work is not something that any researcher or any institution can do. This group, they had to get some help from NVIDIA, which is like one of the major technology firms, to do the work. And it took them something like 3 weeks to train the model and to improve the prediction. Again, I know this was another example. I think I'm going over time. But the point I was trying to make is that using these systems and fine-tuning them is something that you as librarians can be very helpful. And I think this is where this trend is going to go. Like, small scale, very specific, context-specific applications in very specific areas. This is what is going to happen, I think, in the short term. And with that, I'd love to hear any questions, comments, feedback, and thank you.